Hello, so welcome to another sketch along with me doing sketchy drawing type things. I need to work on that title. And yeah, so obviously the keen automotive viewers will have spotted that this is a blue truck. Now I'm using a slightly different technique here. What I'm doing is I'm actually measuring directly off the drawing to get these ratios. Now this is something that you can actually do if you're sketching something by eye. You can hold your pad up and do this, get those ratios actually in reality. You don't, without a reference drawing, but obviously with a reference drawing, if you've got a tablet or a screen, you can use a side of A4 paper and transfer those ratios onto a drawing. So what I'm doing here is I'm measuring the wheel height, the tire height, sorry, then the actual wheel in the middle, the metal bit in the middle, and then I'm going to measure the height of the cab. Now those ratios you can then transfer onto a your drawing. I wouldn't necessarily recommend using this technique all the time, but it's just a different way of doing stuff. And sometimes you may find that it works for you, and other times you might not. But it's a really good way of understanding proportions, because anything you draw, sits within a box basically. But that box is actually ultimately sliced. Um, so what you have is halfway down the side of the box you will have a door handle. If a car is in a box. Um, Now the ironic thing is, after all this planning and actually putting some perspective in and checking those ratios, the end drawing is clearly wrong. Because the height of the grill is far too high and the proportions are all out. But the thing is, I love the drawing, and this is the daft thing. Is one of the reasons why I genuinely don't sweat, and I would encourage other people not to sweat planning and perspective and things, because uh, how accurate a drawing is in terms of its perspective and ratios and stuff, I think that's less important than people think. It certainly isn't that important when it comes to, did you actually enjoy doing a drawing? And for me, the planning stage and sitting down and getting those, measuring all those ratios and stuff is probably the least fun bit of the drawing. For me, the fun bit is actually the ink, is the line work. Even the pencil sketching, I find sometimes a bit like ugh, but the line work and the painting is generally for me the fun bit. So you can see here what I'm doing is I'm finding the center point of that front panel by doing two diagonal lines from corner to corner, and that will give me in perfect perspective the center point of that whole grille front that contains the headlights and the front grille and that whole front slice. So yes, I'm used to drawing in perspective and thinking in perspective as well to a certain extent. That said, I don't know these pickups very well, and at this point, I've clearly got a lot of height in that front grille, but it doesn't matter. Um, so what I'm doing there is you see, I'm moving backwards and forwards from the pen. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the reference drawing and I'm going, that line goes to there. This is the A post. It goes from here to here. Where does the mirror sit within that form? Um, so a rabbit hole that I'm yet to go down is how you actually draw wheels and things in perspective, because that is they're obviously boxes. They're just boxes. It's a circle within a box. But when it comes to actually how you construct that properly, it's a little bit more detailed and involved than I think a lot of people have time for. Certainly, yeah, maybe I have time for. But yeah, I mean, the other alternative there is you just eyeball them like I did and just, give it a go. So then it's just a case of actually these very rough lines, these initial lines I've put down, it's a case of just defining them, tidying them up a little bit, making sure that the alignment is right. Uh, so here I'm adding in a grill, which I know I'm going to probably simplify it. Instead of putting in all the different louvers or whatever the term is, I'll probably put a lot less in, and that's just to really simplify that. So we're going to go in now. We're going to use my trusty Opus 88 fountain pen. And this is going to end up being, I think, watercolor. So essentially, I don't want to be putting in loads of like cross hatching or texture work with the fountain pen, because we're going to be using we're literally using watercolor for that. So I'm sketching in now with the fountain pen, putting in a couple of details, that said, of the headlights. I think I just spotted that some of that was slightly sloppy, the line work there, and I just wanted to just redo it before I went in with the pen. It's not something I normally do, but I think I'm sensing there's something gone awry about this already. It's that you can see half of the headlight on the left hand side. A little bit of it's cut off because the headlight is recessed back, and there is a slight that front grille is slightly chamfered down one side. There's a slight kink in it, you can see. Anyway, it just sort of helps tell the story, that. So what we've got here is a chrome bumper, which is, chrome is always a bit of a pain to render, to paint and colour, because all it actually does is reflects what's around it. And often when you're drawing something in isolation, where you just have a vehicle on its own, without it in context, that reflection can look quite strange. So what I'm doing here is so I'm putting in the sorry about the dog. So yeah, I'm drawing in just these, zones, these areas, the details of the wheels. There's going to be obviously some real big shadows under those wheels and in the wheel arches, and then the details further back on the pickup bed. I'm obviously tweaking this this area here, because I've noticed that there's some details that I haven't put in, and I'm actually potentially trying to resist drawing in the shape of the wheel arch, because I think I'm going to actually put that in paint. So I think whoever took this picture, what they've done is they've kneeled down to take the picture, because if you look at where the perspective is, it's quite a low angle. The floor of the pickup, or along like the bottom of the body, is going uphill, and if you take a line from the front of the bonnet to the back of the pickup bed, that's slightly downhill. So that would suggest that the picture's probably been taken, the photo's been taken around the height of the headlights, I would say, which is the reason why there's so much perspective in the roof there. No, it's also probably been taken on quite a wide angle lens, because we've got an awful lot of perspective front to back, which would suggest that the focal length of the lens is quite small. What I'm going to do is just put in a very light layer of blue. Now what I'm using here is my micro palette, which has only got 6 colours in. I use it sometimes out and about for sketching. It's obviously tiny, but it does work very well. It's got a cerulean blue, and then I think an ultramarine in there, and a quinacridone rose, which is the pink, and then the Hansa yellow. I think there's a transparent red oxide in there and something else. I can't quite remember. So yeah, as I was saying about chrome before, chrome just reflects what's around it. So it can be quite tricky to render unless you're actually going to draw the environment. So if you're doing chrome in the desert, but you draw a car, in a desert, it makes perfect sense. But if you take that bumper off and just render it up in isolation without anything around it, it can end up looking a bit weird. So you tend to use more of a sort of anonymous, if you know what I mean, colours. So I'm putting in a few of these dark areas, which is a bit of a weird way of working, but this brush is part of my Skoda travel brush set. It's quite a large sort of bulb brush, but it's got a very, very beautifully chiseled tip, which means that you can also load it up with paint and do some very sort of fine detail work. So I don't know whether you saw in the reference drawing that there is a tree in the background here, and I've decided to go ahead and just draw that in with watercolor. Now, this is quite sort of impressionistic, and one of the things that I'm really not sure why I did it in this drawing is I put the pickup actually quite high up on the page. Now you can see there what I've done is instead of mixing the colour for the tree on the palette, I've mixed it on the paper. So I've gone in and just dropped some green in, and then I've dropped in some blue, and I've dropped in a few other bits and bobs. Letting it just sort of play around a little bit there on the page as it dries. So now I'm going to go in and do the shadow underneath the pickup, and again that is subjected to its own form of perspective to a certain extent, and then there's just supposed to be some shadow there for the leaves. So what I'm mixing here is some Van Dyke Brown with French Ultramarine, but I'm trying to mix it a little bit on the paper as well as in the palette, but you can see there is quite a lot of variety, and because I'm being a little bit, what's the word, slapdash is probably the wrong word, but let's just say I'm not being particularly careful with how I'm applying that paint, it's going to create some blooms and some sort of backwashes and things. So it's not going to be the neatest of textures. So I think the shadow of the tree here is over the top of the pickup, but I don't think the shadow references the pickup, which I think is probably a bit of a mistake, really. So one of the things you realise when you start to look at glossy objects, particularly when it comes to vehicles in the urban landscape, is they do sort of collect shadows in quite and tones in quite interesting ways. So if you have a glossy surface on a car, it's kind of it acts almost as a mirror, a coloured mirror, and how you render up those surfaces, you could do it a million different ways, but I tend to sort of think of those reflections as horizon lines or buildings and things like that. So stuff that's in shadow effectively is the true colour of the vehicle. So if you look on the front bonnet there, that dark blue is the true colour of the vehicle, and yet there is a series of highlights. And also there's a series of reflective elements as well. So say, for example, if you're kneeling down to take the picture here of the pickup, and if you were to stand up and look down on the bonnet, you'd see the tree will be reflected, the dark and light of the tree will be reflected in the bonnet surface on the top, if you know what I mean. So gloss surfaces, particularly on vehicles, do act as mirrors effectively. Now, if you really want to understand how reflections work on vehicles, the best way is to look, and they're all around us all the time, really, unless you live particularly rurally. So all you have to do is come up with a shorthand, if that makes sense, for that, because you can't necessarily draw every single detail. So obviously I've got some really dark areas here to put in that I haven't done yet, such as the wheel arches and the wheels. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm mixing a little bit more blue so that I can do another layer over these areas that are kind of, I say in shade, but they're effectively the true colour of the vehicle because there's no highlights on them, if you know what I mean. So I'm just going to add those in there, partly just to bring a little bit more contrast in. And then this grill, which is a mixture. There's a chrome trim around there, which again isn't that easy to render. Um, Now grills and things you can really go to town on, and you can spend hours rendering those up properly. But this is a sort of line and wash demo, so it's I'm not going to go into too much specifics there. Okay, so I'm adding in some other areas of trim and just dulling down the roof a little bit on the inside. A bit of a hair dry. I don't think we're far off there with the painting anyway. Now you could argue that you could put some heavier shadows underneath the truck, but instead what I'm doing here is I'm using my Flex Nib pen, and I'm just adding some slightly heavier line work actually underneath the pickup. Yeah, so that heavier line work is just at the bottom of the cab and along that front bumper. And then we've got like a pointless 10-second gap. So the final bit I think I'll be doing here is using my trusty gel pen, which is Secura gel pen, and adding in some reflections. It's nice on the chrome and on some of the glossy bits of the vehicle, just to add in some little highlights. Also, you can do it on painted areas. See there, I'm trying to sort of the reflection of almost like a mountain range or something there. And then again, because you do get small and big highlights on bodywork. Now, if it's a glossy bodywork and you've got smaller radiuses, like around there, that wheel arch, the highlight would be a lot smaller. And again, just adding a few little dots there. I think I'm tinkering here essentially. Really good. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. It's a bit of a unusual one. This is another one that I've drew actually quite a long time ago, and I'm sort of doing a voiceover to catch up with it in a way. So it perhaps quite isn't as concise in a way. But I hope you enjoyed that, and let me know what you think. Cheers, guys. Bye.